Hi, I'm Em.
And my name is Bea.
And this is
Fangirls Anonymous. A quick warning, this podcast is not for kids.
We get into some pretty explicit stuff.
But if you're still with us and into that, welcome.
Hello to Season 2 of Fangirls Anonymous!
It is a new season and a new year, which is very exciting. I hope all of you have enjoyed the end of the old year, or at least good riddance to the old year.
My god, so happy. Hopefully, a lot more people start being a lot cooler and start getting more shots in their arms and we can get rid of this pandemic, but I'm not betting on it. Anyway, this is a very exciting time for us. We get to start another season for this show, and we are also starting a new thing. Mm-hmm. What is the thing called, Bea?
We are starting, this is something of an experiment, we're going to call Fic Club, and in essence what we're going to do is we're going to pick a fic, we're going to give you the title and the author and a link down in the notes, and we want you to go forth and read it, and have thoughts and opinions and questions, and we want you to take these thoughts and opinions and questions and send them to us so that we may know them as well.
And may talk about them and analyze them. So this first fic that we're doing this for this season 2, because there's going to be 3 fics throughout the whole season. The first fic is War Children by Nonymous, and the link will be in the show notes. It is 106,000 words. So please, right when you listen to this, go read it. And if you are listening way after the fact, like we're in season 4 kind of territory, go ahead and read it. Every fic that we have chosen for Fic Club is absolutely a rec, but it's just a different type of rec. So if that's the case, go read it. But if this has just come out, or it's been a couple weeks since it came out, go read it and then send in your questions, comments, insights, that kind of stuff to mandbepresents@gmail.com. That will also be in the show notes. There's going to be a dedicated episode for analyzing these fics for everyone. So if you send in an email, you might get to hear your name. If you don't want your specific real life name, send us a username.
Preferred.
Yes, a preferred name, please. We love the anonymity here. So send in. We'll have a dedicated episode to that stuff. And we're very excited because War Children is a wonderful fic. Mm-hmm. So we can't wait to talk about it with all of y'all. So yeah, Fic Club, very exciting, super fun stuff. We today are going to be talking about original characters, which has a lot of controversy.
A lot. Very much so.
Strangely.
Like, this is one of those polarizing things, once again, that if you bring it up in casual conversation in fandom, you're going to get some strong opinions.
Yeah, before I started researching for this episode, I was like, I feel like I know a little bit about OCs and, like, you know, why people don't like them. And then I was totally wrong once again. Like with my with our fanzines episode, totally wrong. I'm sure if you have read Fic, to the people who are listening, then you have read OCs. They're kind of, unless it's strictly in canon Fic,
or very, very short.
Or very, very short, then the author sometimes, or almost always, needs to utilize a character that he or she or they have written that isn't in canon. So I'm sure a lot of people listening have experience with OCs. I personally have had a lot of good experience with OCs. I don't think I've ever really read an OC that I didn't like, which is rare. I have found online, apparently. Maybe I'm just reading all the really good fic. What about you, Bea?
I would say that it's sort of a mixed bag. I've read OCs that I really like and think are extremely well written and make a lot of sense to me. But I've also read ones that they're really well written and I really hate them and the way they're used in story. And then I've also just read ones that are straight bad. So
okay, we've had the gamut then between the two of us. A definition that I found online from this website called ppc.fandom.com, which we will get into, is an original character, or what we will be using, what we will be saying the rest of the episode. We're going to be using OC instead of original character. It's a character that an author uses in fanfic, or sometimes fan art, I have found, but that's kind of rare, that wasn't in the canon or the media that the fic or fan art is from. So the character that the fic writer writes about wasn't actually in the original canon.
Or any other franchise's canon. It's not somebody else's
Yes.
character. That's not what it is either.
Yeah, like in Star Wars, if you use Bo-Katan in a fic, that's not an OC.
But if you stick Naruto in there, that's also not an OC.
No, it is not. You're right. That is not an OC. But if Phil from down the street is in your fic, and Phil from down the street wasn't in the original canon or in any other piece of media, really, that's an OC. Gotta love Phil. This website that I found, which was one of the few websites that I could find that really delved into like OCs as like a cultural phenomenon within fandom, which I think there needs to be more analysis on OCs because it's a pretty interesting concept. ppcfandom.com kind of puts the concept of OC into a dichotomy. So there are either good OCs or bad OCs, which we will talk about later. And according to that website, a good OC is an OC that agrees with canon and blends into the continuum of the story, which makes sense. I think I basically agree with that definition.
Yeah, you don't really want a character that sticks out like sore thumb.
True, unless it's crack, and then it's a decision.
That's a whole different level of analysis on whether or not your OC is good or not.
True, because then it's a decision by the author. But fandom.com, PPC fandom.com says a bad OC is an OC that doesn't blend in and is almost always a Mary Sue. We will be doing an entire series on Mary Sue this season, so we're gonna get into that stuff. But I just don't agree with the assertion that almost all bad OCs are Mary Sues, because Mary Sue is a very particular type of character, I think. It's strange. It's strange that they asserted that, I think. I kind of also just have a problem with the term Mary Sue anyway, so you shouldn't just throw it around. I wonder how old this article is, actually, now that I think about it, because I feel like Mary Sue was kind of utilized more often in the past, but now it's a very specialized type of term. According to this website that I found, which it was the only website I was able to find that had any sort of analysis on the concept of OC, they wrote 6 questions to consider when you are evaluating OCs in a fic. 1. Could this character feasibly have grown up in this universe? 2. Where does this character live in this universe? 3. Does this character support themselves in this universe? 4. Does this character comply with the established themes of the continuum they are colonizing? 5. Could this character suitably interact with others in this universe? And 6. If any of these rules are broken, is there an explanation that suits the continuum? I think the question I really wanted to look at was number 4, which is, does this character comply with the established themes of the continuum they are colonizing?
That's some strongly worded language there.
Yeah, it's a loaded word, colonizing. It's almost like they're writing this with the concept of this fic writer isn't worthy of writing the fic that they're talking about if they're putting an OC in it. That's what it feels like to me. That's so weird to me.
It does feel it's strong language. There's a lot of connotations that go into the phrasing of that. Yeah. And most of them are not positive.
No, not at all. It's very strange to me. I do agree with some of the questions, though. How does this character exist, basically, within this world? Is it feasible? Is it possible for them to have to exist in this world without the hand of the author, kind of a thing? I get that, but just the way that they're talking about it is so funny, and I feel like a lot of people who maybe they just don't like fandom or fanfiction or people who write it, this is kind of what they think of OCs as. I don't know, they're not worthy of the media that they are in this fic, essentially. The characters, the OCs themselves. It's very strange. This was a quote from the article. Chances are, if the character scores a no on one or more of these rules, they are worthy of examination. If not as a sue, then as a sue accomplice, or simply useless / poorly written character.
Yeah, I'm getting the vibe that they do not care for OCs much.
At all. And this is supposed to be an article talking about what they are just generally, not an opinion article. Like, this is supposed to be a definition, like a writing on a definition, and that's it. It's very strange to me. It's just a lot of rhetoric for people who don't like Mary Sue's or OCs. Enough about that article. I think that this is some of the stuff that people think about when they are discussing OCs with themselves or other people or people in fandom. One of them is Mary Sue. So a lot of people, when they think about OCs, they love to think, oh, every OC that is either, like, usually they're main characters, and usually they're just a character that the author put in that is just, like, perfect. There's nothing wrong with them. They somehow landed themselves into the middle of the world, and they're too OP. They're too overpowered. And they didn't deserve their powers.
Or even that it makes it kind of deconstructs the story to have them sit in the middle of it, because either it belittles the other ongoing conflicts, or it makes them sort of, a lot of times when you stick a character who has all of the magic powers in the middle of a situation, it cuts your tension because suddenly they can just fix things.
Yes. Yes, true.
Which makes the whole conflict, which is what most people enjoy about a story, feel kind of pointless, which is disappointing.
Yeah. That kind of reminds me of Spy Kids 3. In, like, the middle of the end, essentially, of the film, there was a guy who came in, and, you know, if you've seen the movie, it's about a couple of the two Spy Kids. I think it's Spy Kids 3. It's not 2. It has to be 3. It's like they're in, like, a virtual world, and there's a kid that comes in and is just like, I am the most powerful, and then he immediately dies. So he cuts the tension, and then he dies, and you're like, oh, they're still in deep shit, basically. The two characters. It's funny. Yeah, Mary Sue's, we're gonna talk about them, so we shouldn't probably delve into this too much, but no, it's funny. People automatically, when they're considering OCs, they, in the periphery of that consideration, they could think of Mary Sue's.
It's especially funny because in my actual experience reading OCs, I, due to my own personal preferences on what I read, almost never run into that particular kind of OC. So
I don't either.
It's a little bit funny to me.
But maybe we too are just a couple of readers who are very picky with what we read. I don't know. It could be a vast underground space of OC Mary Sue's that we have no idea and we have not delved into. But we've read a lot of fic. We're in a lot of different fandoms, so I don't think that that's the case, but we could be wrong. So another consideration that people have when they're discussing OCs is that the OCs are brought in without any thought to canon, to the canon continuum. And to me, when you find that in fic, that is an example of why the fic isn't well written. I just don't know if that's necessarily an author who has a lot of experience writing. In that regard, the whole fic is kind of not awesome. Not necessarily that the OC is not awesome. If you're reading good fic, then almost always you're going to find, if there's no C, then it's going to be good. And the character's going to be good. So just find good fic. Yeah, it's kind of hard to find a bad OC in a good fic, I think.
Or at the very least, if you do, it's like finding half a worm in an apple. You're just like, oh man, I was enjoying that.
Gross. It's true though. Yeah, you're right. If there is a bad OC, then it can kind of ruin the whole experience. There is a thought process that people have about OCs, or a continual, like, accusatory stance that people have with OCs in fanfiction, that it's just a self-insert for the author. The only time I have ever found a self-insert for the author is a small character who's handing them coffee behind the coffee shop that they fall in love with and is like, wow, you guys are so cute together. Like, oh, that's the author saying that. You can tell that that's the author. Sorry.
The Stanley cameo of the fic world.
Yes, that is absolutely. That's what should be called. That specific kind of character. Yeah, the Stanley cameo. I kind of agree with that, but only in that it's almost always, in my opinion, it's a tiny little one-off character that is not a big part of the story if it's a well-written fic.
It should be noted here that there are tropes that exist, to the best of my knowledge, that a lot of their core foundational elements are very much about sort of a self-insert OC, especially when it comes to building a romance with a different character in the story, especially one who's already canon. So one of the tropes that it sort of is the core of the conceit, I believe, or at the very least, if you find this trope, you're going to find a lot of it, even if most people don't want to read that necessarily, is it's from the Lord of the Rings fandom, and it's called the 10th Walker. For those of you who are not familiar with Tolkien's works, a long, complicated story short, it's essentially a quest, and at the beginning of the Lord of the Rings, you have 9 people who are chosen to go on the quest to do the thing. And these are your 9 main characters, and all of the crap happens to them. The Lord of the Rings fandom, the conceit is that what if there was a 10th character? And so it is the 10th Walker, and it's usually an OC that people bring in, and a lot of the time it is a self-insert. A common flavor is modern girl ends up via magic shenanigans in Middle-earth, and goes on the quest with them, and it's pretty clearly a self-insert, especially if the OC has some prior knowledge of how the series is supposed to go.
It's like Inuyasha.
Only worse, because Inuyasha was made at least by a mangaka who wanted a story independently, more or less, and
Yes.
was already working on the premise that it was a romance as opposed to an epic fantasy that has relatively little romance in it, and then they were like,
No,
but what if we made it?
Gimli and Legolas.
Yeah, that's, no matter what their love story is in the actual books themselves, my understanding is that unless it was culturally or politically significant, it was sort of like, yeah, that's happening, we're not talking about that.
Well, that really reminds me, the 10th Walker, just like that phrase, reminds me of the 12th player, which is like something that you'll find in a lot of, like on a lot of cars and stuff in Seattle and in Washington State. It's a phrase that people use to be like, I'm the 12th player for the Seattle Seahawks, because there's only 11 players or 11 footballers or whatever on the field at one time. So it's just a way to signify your support for the team. Go football. Yes. Another conversation that people tend to have about OCs is that authors tend to embellish the OC to the extreme as kind of a way to make them seem more lifelike. Because they're a new character to the reader, the authors tend to establish them too much, which is interesting. I don't think I've ever read anything like that. That's a new concept to me. But that's kind of, it makes sense, especially with somebody who's a younger writer, doesn't have as much experience with writing. I feel like that is definitely the way that they would tend to go if they're being really serious about what they're writing, but they just don't have the perspective that somebody who has written more would have. So they don't know when to stop embellishing, essentially.
Yeah, we don't need to know what color their shoelaces were. We never did.
We don't. We don't need to know whether the president gave them those shoelaces or not.
Most of the time, we don't even need to know if they're wearing shoes. We can just make an assumption.
Yeah, people make assumptions gladly when it comes to fic and to fiction in general. Do you want to talk about soapbox OCs?
Yeah. So another type of OC that you can encounter, which this is one of the ones that I think frustrates people. It's where it's pretty obvious that this character is here purely so that the author can either have them or one of the protagonists, depending on which side of the conflict the OC is on, get up on their soapbox about a specific issue and say their piece. So let's say that we have somebody who's writing an OC who is madly in love with your male protagonist, and they end up conceiving a child, and then there's some inner conflict with some other characters, and then your OC gets up on her soapbox and is talking about, pro-choice. And it's pretty clear that this is in language that is the author voicing an opinion on an issue that is a real world issue rather than a character in a story in a context where they would be speaking about it a certain way. It can frustrate people a lot when you get to that point because you're like, did you just create an entire character to like hand me a thesis statement on an opinion that I didn't want because I'm reading fic? Like,
And that's not to say that fic shouldn't be used to talk about social issues. Because if you read War Children, you'll be like, holy shit, this author's really getting into the concepts of homelessness, LGBTQIA problems, trans issues, like that kind of stuff. And it's so good. But people have a problem when it comes to mostly OCs coming into a fic to talk about, to almost soapbox to the audience about a particular issue without utilizing it very well within the themes of the story. Like, the reason why in War Children it works so well is because the characters are in positions that the author put them in, but it works well because the canon that they're from could be utilized to describe some things that the author is talking about. But if it's like friggin' a Succession AU and you have an OC coming in talking about stuffed animals, like they shouldn't be thrown away, like too many stuffed animals are thrown away or something like that, that's a ridiculous idea. But like if you had that, then that would be dumb. It's just a dumb thing anyway, but you get my point. It's like it has to work within A, canon, B, where the characters are themselves, and C, maybe don't have an OC come in and talk about a specific issue just once and then it never is brought up again. It's very soapboxy.
or it feels very, very frustrating as a reader when you go into this and there's already a little bit of a hurdle in suspension of disbelief sometimes with OCs because you're reading fic, right? You already have suspended your disbelief pretty far in terms of trusting the characters in this canon and then the writer themselves. And now you're trusting that they're writing a good character and you have them, you're getting led down this path with them. And then you have to take in stride the fact that they've just sort of preached at you.
Yeah.
And so you have to look back at it and go, did you just set up this entire domino chain of events for this moment? Because if that's so, then I feel very cheated.
I think also when you're talking about social issues like that in a fic, you're really preaching to the choir. That also is, to me, indicative of a young person without much experience writing a fic, a long fic with an OC. And I promise I'm not trying to hate on young people writing fic. I've never even written a fic. I edited quite a few fics for people. Since I was 17, I've been editing fics. I've been betaing fics. You can usually tell when somebody who is not well versed in writing is writing a fic and you're reading it. And a lot of the times the OCs in those fics aren't fantastic. That's all I'm trying to say. If you are young and you are writing fic, that's so amazing. Please continue writing fic. You are becoming the lifeblood of this community because you are the fic writer. Please continue to do so. Even if it's bad, write it. It's okay. But anyway, we're talking about OCs. A lot of OCs are also sometimes used to talk about main characters in an outside perspective. Usually these are shorter fics, but a main character, they're the pairing of the fic, and the main character whose perspective it is looking at them in a perspective that obviously the main characters wouldn't have about themselves.
And I actually have a really good example of this type of OC, and it's got a ton of OCs in it, and it's definitely outsider perspective, but whether or not it's a specific OC's perspective, it's close third, so I don't know. Shrug your shoulders. So it's called A Quiet Night Not in the Cards by Delightful I Am, and it is a fic in which you are in a bar and Derek Hale is lurking in the corner scaring the crap out of everybody, and then Styles barges in and confronts him in this very loud, messy confrontation, also scaring the pants off of everybody because they're like, he just picked a fight with the biggest, baddest in the room. And so you have this wonderful outside perspective of these two characters from the point of view of somebody who knows what kind of problems they have, but also is sort of flabbergasted by their survival. And it's really cute.
Is it short?
Relatively. It's a couple thousand words.
Yeah, like the ones that I have found are like 4K. Like they're shorter. Short to me, I guess,
Mhm.
is a relative term because anything lower than 30K is short to me. Yeah, no, they tend to be shorter because the author wants to get into the pairing, obviously, the main pairing that people come to read the fic for, but they want an outside perspective, so it tends to be shorter because they don't want to get into the OC necessarily. They want to get into the pairing. And unless there's a reason for the OC to be around the pairing a lot, then it's going to be short. Another example of that actually is a really good fic. I will link it. I can't remember exactly what it's called. I did talk about it in the Good Omens episode that we did. It's about Aziraphale and Crowley trying to find a house in London to buy. And the entire fic is in the perspective of their real estate agent. So it's very cute. I will link it. Can't remember what it's called, but it's very cute. Okay, so we have some fic that I think are examples of like good OCs and kind of mediocre bad OCs. So I have a couple fics that are really good OC, have really good OCs in them. One is called God Only Knows by Secret Soup. It is a Luberto fic, which is Luca and Alberto from Luca that recently released. Wow, it's been 6 months. It was released in June of 2021. Luca, Pixar film, adorable. And basically, in chapter 3, this author introduces an OC named Kjell Nilsson. The author writes this character in a way that is so believably real. Like, it feels like this could be a character in the second installment of the series, essentially, of these films, of the film. I will say that the main characters are older in this fic. They the author made them older in the fic. They're more firmly teenagers instead of just like kind of on the cusp of puberty. So just to let you know. But usually I have found that when there is a larger character that is an OC in a fic, it's usually a character that the author utilizes to make the pairing grow closer because of like jealousy or like a scheme. So in this fic it is that, but it's really cute. And it kind of really isn't necessarily a scheme. It's more like Luca realizing that, oh, I don't like it that Alberto's seemingly interested in this other guy, even though they're just friends. But yeah, anyway, adorable, really good OC, very believable. In Instructions Not Included by Atalan, which is a fic I have talked about before in the Good Omens episode, it has so many OCs in it. So the villain of the film the film. I don't know why I say that about this fic. The villain of this fic is an OC. She's interesting. She's not exactly amazing, but when you're introduced to a new villain in a franchise or a film, then sometimes you don't get a lot of information about that villain, just like in this one. So it's a pass for me. But Raphael is an angel that is introduced in this fic, and he's hilarious. He's so fucking funny. And their assistant is no C. She's great. Their dog is no C. He is like hilariously amazing. I love that dog so much. He is such a good boy. I love that a lot of the characters in this fic are OCs, and they're so enmeshed in the world of themselves that it's hard not to be charmed by them. The author did a really good job. So you have some examples of bad OCs, Bea.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy.
So I'm going to start with one that if you do a minimal amount of research on the internet, you will probably have pop up because it hits all the boxes for a bad OC. And I'm just going to cite the whole fic because from what I understand, it's basically littered with them, but it's My Immortal, which is, yeah, it's the Harry Potter fic, and it is about a self-insert OC character who is embellished and overdescribed and overpowered and does not fit well in the world and doesn't make a great deal of sense and
We've talked about this fic before, I'm pretty sure, in a
mm-hmm.
different episode. Crazy stuff. Don't go read it. Don't
No,
read it.
the entire thing is quite bad, so
Unless you want
to
laugh.
laugh
Yeah.
at how bad it is.
Yeah.
And that one is about as far off the deep end of extreme and dislikable as you can get. That is this gold standard of bad.
Yes, it really is. People outside of fanfiction know about My Immortal. It's that bad.
Mm-hmm. On the exact opposite end of the extreme if that is the gold standard of bad, this one is I'm going to put it as a your mileage may vary. I personally do not care for it, this OC, very much, but a lot of people really like this fic and think it's really well done, and it is really well written. So, I tip my hat to the author. They are doing a really good job. I personally don't like it. So, all the way at the other extreme, really good writing, does not tip any of the boxes that we have talked about. It's just a personal preference for me. And it is an OC from the fic Like a Cruel Mistress Woos by Salvia G. This one I have a very particular reason for disliking, and there are several different OCs that kind of float in and out, but there's a main one. The story is about Steve Rogers after he has rescued Bucky Barnes in the Marvel Cinematic Universe continuity. And he's kind of got a rocky road because he's rescued Bucky, and Bucky doesn't appear to really like him or want to get to know him again. And so he decides he's going to take a step back from avenging and try and, take a sabbatical, figure himself out. And he kind of has this sexual awakening where he realizes that he is stunningly gay. And he ends up getting involved with this OC. And I wouldn't mind so much. The author puts a lot of thought and effort into making his relationship with this OC really sweet, and kind of putting the narrative focus and weight behind this pair. But it's tagged pretty clearly that that's not endgame. And so knowing that I'm reading several thousand words of this deeply thought out romance between two characters who I know it's going to fail, it's going to fall apart, really, really frustrates me a lot. I do
Yeah,
not
well,
like putting my emotional energy into a pairing that I know is going to end in tears, because I do like both of them as characters. So it kind of makes me want to tear my hair out when I know that's not where the story is going.
yeah, that's kind of the antithesis of what a lot of pairing fic is. You know it's going to end up happily, almost always. And in
Mm-hmm.
this way, it is not. Because you know it's not going to happen because it's tagged Stucky, right?
Yeah.
Man, that's crazy. That was a decision by the
Mm-hmm.
author.
It definitely was. And
Yeah.
so I hesitate strongly to call it bad, because I don't think that it is a bad OC. I think it's a very well done OC. I just don't like the story. And that's 100%
Fascinating.
personally me.
Hmm.
Again, the other end of the extreme. If it goes from just wow, so bad, to this one is actually it's good on all counts except for I don't like it.
I think once you've listened to this episode and you read more fic, you'll be like, wow, that's an OC, and I didn't even think about it. Like, that's just a
Mm-hmm.
character now in my
You'd be
head. But
surprised how often they pop out of the woodwork once you're
they really
looking
do.
for them.
Yeah.
Because they actually, the best OCs that I've discovered are all peripheral or side characters that just,
Yeah.
like a musical score in movies, if you notice it, it's bad. But if you don't notice it, they just blend in and are atmospheric and they work great. And you never know they're there.
Okay. So we got really, we really got into OCs, and they're really fun, and there's a lot of controversy, as we talked about. But if you
Mm-hmm.
want to read more OCs, here is our Rat Corner.
So I have two really short little recs. And these ones, much like A Quiet Night, Not in the Cards, they're outsider point of view short little fics that are about a perspective on the main characters. The first one is called A Practical Man by Dragonstorm, and it is a Merlin fic in which a spy master comes to Camelot and figures out pretty dang quickly who Merlin is and what he does, and decides to do something about that. It's a really fun little character study, and it's really sweet. I wouldn't really say that it's Merthyr, but it's still really cute. The second one is called About Edogawa by Ellen Brand, and this one is a Detective Conan fic. It's an anime about a teenage detective who gets turned into a child, and he works really closely with the police, specifically the section of the Japanese police that deal with murders. And the fic is about this group of police all going out for drinks, as you do in Japan, and the new guy on the team hasn't met the protagonist of the show yet, who's a little kid who's just, preternaturally smart and a little bit eerie, and it's them discussing him. It's really interesting because in the show nobody really questions or thinks too hard about why a child who's nominally 6 or 7 years old is futzing around at murder scenes, and nobody seems particularly bothered by it after a certain point either. So it's nice to have this little, like, maybe they actually do notice. Maybe they're not all idiots. They just are keeping their mouths shut.
I guess I would too. Maybe it's a little ghost child. And everybody would think I was insane if I brought up, why is there a kid here? Anyway, that sounds fascinating. Even though I'm not in the Detective Conan fandom, I might read that because I love it. I love that so much. I love meta humor and meta analysis of like the canon that you are writing about. I think that's fun. For my fic, it's titled Dying for You, in parentheses, again and again, by AvoidingAverage. It is a old guard AU within the Witcher fandom. Jaskier and Geralt are two immortals of these 5 people who are immortals. And it's fascinating. Super duper interesting. If you haven't watched Old Guard, the film on Netflix, go ahead and do yourself a favor and watch it. It's pretty fun. It's a good fic. There's some OCs in it, I think. I'm not super versed in the Witcher stuff, but I'm pretty sure that they're OCs. At least they're tagged as OCs, so obviously they're OCs. But yeah, it's a really good fic. It makes you interested in the concept of immortality, even more so than maybe you already are. You're like, wow, the ethical implications of being an immortal. Fun, tasty. Anyway, I think we're done. Super fun. Welcome to season 2. I hope you guys are excited for listening to a lot more stuff about fan fiction.
And yeah. I hope you're excited to read along with us.
Fic Club. Fic Club's gonna be fun.
Yeah, so don't forget to check out the link in the show notes.
Yes, and read it and then send us stuff. Send us all of your opinions about it. Vast paragraphs, please. Would be so fun to read and talk about in the next episode. Well, not the next episode, but the episode when it comes out. Anyway, thank you for listening.
I guess we'll see you all next week on
Fangirls Anonymous. Bye!